He tied 2 suits of armor to his body and stepped off the deck. Around him, the greatest fleet in Japan was sinking, and the emperor's grandmother had already vanished beneath the waves. What made a commander choose the sea over surrender? A 7-year-old emperor drowned in the strait. His grandmother chose the sea over surrender and took one of Japan's 3 sacred treasures down with her. How did an entire clan collapse in a single afternoon? By the spring of 1185, the Taira clan was finished as a ruling power, though they did not yet know it. 2 catastrophic defeats at Ichi-no-Tani and Yashima had shattered their army and driven them from the capital they once commanded. What remained of the clan retreated west by sea, dragging with them the young Emperor Antoku and the 3 sacred treasures of the imperial line. Their last hope was the narrow strait of Shimonoseki, where fierce tidal currents could turn a fleet of ships into a weapon, if you knew how to use them. Commanding the Taira fleet was Taira no Tomomori, a general who had spent 2 years watching his clan lose everything, and who understood, better than anyone, exactly how desperate their position had become. The strait at Dan-no-ura ran fast and unpredictable, its currents shifting several times a day. In the morning, the tide flowed in the Taira's favor, massed as they were at the strait's western mouth. Tomomori knew this. His plan depended entirely on ending the battle before the sea turned against him. On the 24th day of the 3rd month, the 2 fleets closed the distance in the strait. Arrows rained across the water first, then grappling hooks and boarding parties as ships crashed together, hull to hull. The Taira had built their reputation as sailors and archers, and it showed. Their volleys tore into the Minamoto lines, forcing rowers to abandon their oars and dive for cover. For the first hours of the battle, victory seemed to belong entirely to the Taira. The morning tide pushed the Minamoto fleet backward, ship by ship, deeper into the strait's eastern waters. Minamoto no Yoshitsune's rowers fought the current as much as the enemy, and for a time it looked as though the entire invasion might simply be swept out of the fight before it truly began. Taira commanders allowed themselves, for the first time in months, to imagine winning. Tomomori moved between the Taira ships in a small boat, shouting orders, steadying wavering captains, keeping the formation tight against the current's advantage. He had seen soldiers break before, men who fought bravely until the moment they sensed the tide of a battle shifting. His job was to make sure that moment never came. For now, at least, the line held. On the Minamoto side, Yoshitsune made a decision that would be remembered and criticized for centuries. Convention held that warriors did not target the rowers and helmsmen who steered enemy ships. They were not combatants, merely crew. Yoshitsune ordered his archers to kill them anyway. Without rowers, Taira ships could not maneuver. Without maneuver, the strait's currents would decide everything. And the tide was about to turn. Just past midday, the current in the strait reversed, as it always did. But this time, it could not have come at a worse moment for the Taira. Ships that had been crippled and left drifting were now dragged directly into the heart of the Minamoto fleet. Formation collapsed into chaos. Boats that could no longer be rowed became floating targets. And the battle that had favored the Taira all morning turned against them within minutes.
Tomomori rowed to the ship carrying the imperial family and gave a single order, one he had hoped never to give: prepare for the end. There would be no retreat, no negotiated surrender that spared the child emperor from Minamoto hands. He had seen enough of this war to know exactly what capture would mean for a young sovereign, and he was not going to let it happen.
Taira no Tokiko, the emperor's grandmother, took the boy in her arms. She told him they were going to a better capital, beneath the waves. Clutching him and the sacred sword of the imperial regalia, she stepped to the ship's edge and jumped into the strait. Around her, ladies of the court followed rather than face capture. The sword, said to have been passed down since the age of the gods, sank into the sea and was never recovered.
Tomomori watched it happen from across the water. There was nothing left to command, nothing left to save. He is said to have looked at what remained of his fleet and remarked that he had now seen everything there was to see in this life. Then, wearing 2 suits of armor to make sure he would not float, he stepped off his ship and let the strait take him too.
By late afternoon, the battle was over. Most of the Taira fleet's leadership was dead, drowned rather than captured. Of the 3 sacred imperial treasures the emperor's family had carried into the strait, only 2 were recovered from the water. The sword was gone, and with it, a piece of the imperial line's claim to unbroken continuity that would trouble Japanese emperors for generations to come.
Minamoto no Yoshitsune had won the war. His brother Yoritomo would rule. Nearly the entire Taira leadership was gone, dead in the strait or executed in the weeks that followed. A single branch of the clan's line was spared. Infants too young to be considered a threat, sent into exile rather than killed. The regime that had governed Japan from the shadow of the throne was in a single afternoon effectively erased. The loss of the sword was not a minor footnote. For centuries afterward, Japanese emperors were enthroned using a replacement blade, and scholars and priests debated whether it carried the same legitimacy as the original, said to have been drawn from the tail of an 8-headed serpent in the Age of the Gods. Divers searched the strait for it on and off for generations. It has never been found.
More than a clan died at Dan-no-ura. The old order of the Heian court, centuries of aristocratic rule,
where power flowed through poetry, lineage, and proximity to the emperor, died with it. Real authority now belonged to whichever warrior clan could hold it by force. Minamoto no Yoritomo would formalize that shift within a decade, but the shift itself had already happened in the water that afternoon. The strait itself would not let the story go. Fishermen in the region began reporting crabs with shell patterns that resembled scowling human faces. Samurai faces, they said, the drowned spirits of Taira warriors, unwilling to leave the water where they died. The heike crab, as it became known, is still found in the waters off Shimonoseki today, a small, strange piece of folklore that refuses to fade. History has not judged the two commanders equally. Tomomori is remembered with a kind of tragic respect, a man who fought honorably for a doomed cause and chose his own end rather than surrender. Yoshitsune's tactics at Dan-no-ura, particularly the killing of unarmed rowers, unsettled even his own allies. He won the battle. He did not entirely win the argument about how it was won. For nearly a century, the Taira had stood at the summit of Japanese power, closer to the throne than any clan before them. It took one war, one shifting tide, and one afternoon in a narrow strait to end it completely. Dan-no-ura remains to this day the story Japan tells itself about how quickly even the mightiest can fall.
Next time on Samurai Chronicles, 4 centuries later, a tea master would be ordered to take his own life by the most powerful man in Japan. No army, no rebellion, just a bowl of tea, a friendship, and a betrayal neither man ever explained. Coming next.
If the fall of the Taira moved you, subscribe to Samurai Chronicles. New episodes every day. The age of the samurai was only just beginning.